Music by Stir Crazy Music. www.stircrazymusic.com.
Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Welcome back to the Prison Pod. Today's guest is Jean Trounstine. She is an author, activist, and educator who has written extensively around the criminal legal system in America. Inside a women's prison, she directed plays resulting in her book, Shakespeare Behind Bars, The Power of Drama in a Woman's Prison. And I thought her latest book was Mother Love, but I found out I was wrong. And what is your latest book, Jean?
My new book, which is coming out May 12th, Sounds Like Trouble to Me, is my first novel.
Okay, so we're going to talk about her writing and her experiences and her prison work and how she has come about to be an author and writing about these experiences. Very happy to have you here with us today, Jean. Thank you for joining us on the Prison Pod.
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really glad to make your acquaintance, Valerie.
Well, it's very nice to meet you. I want to start a little bit, if you could just give us a background on what you did for prison work and where you did that.
So I started working in prison more than 30 years ago when someone actually offered me a job teaching literature and writing in prison. And it was at Framingham Women's Prison in Massachusetts with women. I was not prepared to do that. I had really no experience whatsoever. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, sort of a real regular kid. I didn't know anybody who'd been to prison, but I was game. I thought it was college. I was teaching college classes, and I thought this is an advantage. Not teaching high school like I was teaching college classes in prison. I was teaching high school in the day. So I went into prison as a college professor, and it wasn't until one of the women inside said, "The women don't have plays here, Jean, and you know how to direct plays, and you should direct a play," that I was challenged and I began my real work behind bars.
So did you have a background in theater yourself?
Yes, I had wanted to be an actress all my life, went to Hollywood, tried to do that, and I hated it. I mean, it was so phony and so not me, but I loved working with people, theater work with people who wanted something more out of their life. And that became what fascinated me, working with high school kids who had emotional issues. And I taught in schools like that before I actually taught in a prison. So I liked using theater. I didn't ever think of it as therapy, Valerie. I thought of it as a way for people to connect to their deeper selves. And that use of theater as a way for people to express art behind bars was really what motivated me.
Bringing beauty into a place that doesn't see much.
And they brought beauty because they were the voices. And, for many years I used to say, and I'm sure you know what I mean, I used to say I brought something to them, but they brought as much to me. I mean, we really exchanged things. And I directed 8 plays in the women's prison, and that really started my journey. And I had to write about it because I was the first person really in the world, I didn't know this till about 2 years ago, to direct a Shakespeare play in a prison. There was a lot of Shakespeare work going on in other countries, but no plays had been directed. And I directed Merchant of Venice, and it was a fantastic experience, and for me and for the women, and it changed my life, totally changed my life and my direction of my life.
Beautiful story. I love hearing things like that. It's theater. I love theater myself, so I really love the idea of theater in prison because I think you experience it with the people. It's not on a flat screen and it's not separate from you. It's right there. And I think you feel the emotions and the spirit of the people as they're performing. So, and I'm imagine now there must have been male and female roles. So did the women play both?
Yeah, well, the women played both. And of course, in Shakespeare's day, the men played women. So I felt this was very much in the tradition of Shakespeare. And actually, I had a dream about Shakespeare during the rehearsal process, and we had lunch, and he had salad. And I remember how much I loved talking to him. And he inspired me. I mean, Shakespeare is always someone I loved his work, but bringing Shakespeare to the women meant that they could do anything. They could, if they could understand Shakespeare, in my mind, they had access to something that people did not give them access to normally. And these women were bright, creative, funny. They were incredibly inventive, and they took risks. And they took risks, had taken risks in their lives in terrible ways, but they could take risks on stage in very creative ways. And they were really good. I mean, they were as good as any people I had worked with outside prison.
Amazing thing to do. Was there a favorite? Now you did other plays, right?
Right. I did 8 plays. I did all classic texts. I ended up doing, beside that Shakespeare play, I ended up doing Taming of the Shrew, which we put with rap music, and it was called Rap Shrew. And that was really fun. The women loved that and danced and sang. But I did other classic texts that weren't Shakespeare, like we adapted The Scarlet Letter, which was really quite amazing to do The Scarlet Letter in prison. And we did other when I say classic, other things that are classics often used in schools that if you stop going to school or you go to prison, you might not have access to. So I did those kinds of texts.
Now, were those presented to any people from the outside or?
Yes, it all depended on who was the superintendent. So depending on, in the beginning, the families came in and we would have 2 productions, one for the people inside and one for their families. And then they started making me do it in other spaces beside the gym. I had to do it once in the chapel, which I couldn't do a production in the chapel with families. We had to do it in when they came in for, the visiting room. I had to turn the visiting room. So, I had to adapt. And that's the nature of prison. You have to do whatever they tell you to do, basically, unless you want to be kicked out if you're a person coming in.
Now you said you did this work for 30 years?
No, I did this work for 10 years, and then I started writing. It turned me into a writer, and it also got me into a program called Changing Lives Through Literature, which is a program for people on probation where they read texts and talk about the books in groups and get time off their probation. A judge, a probation officer, and a facilitator, i.e. a professor, is in a group with people who have broken the law and who essentially are thinking about their lives and trying to come to grips with what difference they want to make in their lives from what they've been. And literature helps them think through their lives. And it's a fantastic thing. We use novels or short stories, mostly, some poetry.
I hadn't heard of that program. That's very interesting. I love hearing about all the different things that different facilities try because, programming is so important inside the prisons, especially things that aren't the same. That's why I love the idea of theater because it really gives self-expression. It's art in itself, designing a stage setup or anything like that. And what was the name of the book again from that?
That book was called Shakespeare Behind Bars, The Power of Drama in a Women's Prison. And I published that book in 2001. So that was my first book. And that was published, and it did well. Is a niche book. I mean, when I say did well, I mean, a lot of people in the prison business, know about the book because there are not that many books written about theater in prison or about women. And mine was very much sort of a memoir, but I didn't write about myself. I wrote about the women, sort of like me observing everything that they'd gone through. It's a fun book. It's a hopeful book because it shows the power of drama. in a women's prison.
I've added that to my list because it looks
Thank
so interesting. And I know that you have a new book coming out, but I do want to speak briefly. Is Mother Love the only piece of fiction that you've written?
Mother Love was my first piece of fiction, book of short stories. Sounds Like Trouble to Me, which we'll get into in a little bit, is my first novel. I don't know how, I mean, I'm going to tell you, I really have always thought of myself as a nonfiction writer. And so to venture into fiction was not sort of planned in my. After Shakespeare Behind Bars, I wrote another book called Boy with a Knife, which is about a young man who killed somebody, a true story of Carter Reed, who killed someone when he was 16 and had to go to an adult prison. And that book was very much based on his experience. And I wrote him for 6 years in order to get information from him. And he didn't get out of prison until right about when we published the book. So that was kind of an amazing story. And then I wrote a couple of other books. Like I said, I've written 8 books. And Mother Love was born before COVID. It was born because I went to a parole hearing. When I wrote the book about Carter, Boy with a Knife, I got interested in parole. And parole, I'll just say for your listeners, and because a lot of people don't understand the difference between parole and probation. Parole is usually something you get when you're in prison to serve the rest of your sentence out of prison under very strict supervision. It's something you have to earn. It's not a fait accompli, and it's not an easy thing to do, whereas people sometimes think it's a free ride. It is not that at all. And as I'm sure you know, parole is very misunderstood in this society. It's sort of thought of, wow, he got out of prison, as though it was nothing. So I got interested in parole. And I used to go, and I still do, I go to lifer parole hearings in Massachusetts are open to the public. And I've been to probably 50 of them now. But I had not gone to any, and I started going to them, and they were an eye-opening experience for me. And one parole hearing I went to was this remarkable hearing of, his name was Kima Mack, a juvenile. Massachusetts had just changed laws, so juveniles could no longer get a life without parole sentence. They had to be allowed parole, at least be eligible for parole. So he got that sentence, Kima, and I went to his hearing, eligible for parole. And at the hearing, his mother stood up and apologized. There was like a bar in between. People sat on one side, the people who were seeking parole and the supporters, and on the other side, the people who wanted the person to stay in prison forever. And someone would say the victim of the crime's family. I think they're both victims of crime, so I don't say one is more a victim. So Kima's mother got up and apologized to the mother of the person who Kima had killed. And the parole board didn't know what to do. They were shocked. They stopped. There were like 7 of them, and they stopped. They didn't know. And this exchange went on for a few minutes, and it was incredibly moving to me. So when I finished that parole hearing, and Kima ultimately got parole, you don't know until months later. But when I got that, I wrote about it, and I never felt that I could write about it in nonfiction as truthfully as it needed to be told. And so I started writing about it as fiction. And that's how I began writing short stories. I wrote that story, fictionalized it, and then I wrote 10 stories, and that's how Mother Love came into being. All mothers of children who had killed people.
In all different
In
circumstances.
all different circumstances.
Because I read so little fiction. Everything I read is all technical stuff. But anyways, so when I first got the book, I said, I started reading it and I didn't realize it was a work of fiction. And then I says, wait a minute, let me go back and find out more about you and about the book. And I said, oh, wait a minute, I says, oh, now I'm not going to like it. Because but I thought you did some incredible writing in this book because you weren't exploiting any true crime type stories, which I hate seeing when they're youth done. Not to say that people don't want to tell their stories, that's fine, but the ones that expose people that way. And you created so many different circumstances, like the type of crime that happened. and the environment that the mothers were living in, whether or not there was a father in the picture. Differences in ages. Some of them were adult children. So I really liked the way that you did that, and I thought the book was very well balanced. I've read it all but the last 2 chapters, so
You'll
I've
like
really
the last
enjoyed.
one, Ruth. Ruth is also based on they're all based on people I've had experience with or in some way or another.
Well, that's what I figured, that they were based on true
Yeah.
stories, or events
Yeah.
that you had happen in your life.
Attention! Choreo, a better way to connect with loved ones who are incarcerated. Without Choreo, family and friends wait for a call and hope they can answer. With Choreo, inmates can call or message at any time. When your inmate calls their Choreo number, they will hear your voice and text messages. Inmates receive and leave messages at any time using standard prison phones, making connection easy and predictable. For information about Choreo, visit choreo.org. Stay connected.
So, Sounds Like Trouble to Me, I want to tell you, is also based on true stories. I don't think I would write something, honestly, Valerie, if it wasn't based on truth. Now, the odd thing is that I've learned for some things I need fiction to tell truth more than facts tell truth. And I'm going to tell you 2 stories that Sounds Like Trouble to Me is based on, and I think you'll find these fascinating since you like, to read stuff and you know a lot about the criminal legal system. The first story, I had never heard this before, and I read a little article. It was in a New Jersey paper. Who knew? I don't know how I found it. Some little New Jersey article about a warden who had killed her abusive husband and was sent to the awaiting trial unit sent to a jail. And so I thought, wow, a warden is now on the other side of the law. How interesting is that? I asked myself, what will happen to her? What will become of her? What will she do? Will she stay this hard-ass warden that she sort of had a reputation for? Will she isolate herself? Will she get to know what will happen to her? And I kept searching day after day to find out what her sentence was. Nothing. I couldn't find anything. It was crazy. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to have to write this story. And that's how I began writing. And I'm telling you, I sat down and I got the first lines, and I'm paraphrasing myself, so it's not exactly this, but it was something. Nettie was as still as her husband. The only difference was she had a gun in her hand. That was my first line. And I thought, wow, where'd she get the gun? What happened? How did she have a gun in her hand? Wait a minute. What? And so I realized that this is what fiction writers do. Many of them, they don't know, like Joyce, one of my very favorite writers, Joan Didion, says, you have to write in order to find out what you are thinking. And I said, yes. So I started to write, and I called up my friend Stacy Borden, who had been in prison over and out 30 times and started a reentry program for women. And I created a fictional prison in Massachusetts because I knew enough about Massachusetts, but I got all these details from Stacy about the smells and the sounds, about what it was like to be in a waiting trial, because I'd been teaching in prison, not in a waiting trial. And again, for your viewers and listeners, a waiting trial is where they put you before you get a sentence, and it can be brutal. It can be worse than the prison sentence because of how you're treated and ignored and just sort of shuffled around. And if you have a murder sentence, I have found that it takes over a year for you to get a trial. And so my Nettie had to wait in the awaiting trial unit for 13 months before she went to trial. And that's common. And so that's where my story takes place, in the awaiting trial unit. So one other story that came in that's a true story. Have you heard about what happened at the Federal Correctional Prison in Dublin?
Don't
No.
think
Okay. I'm
so.
sure you know how much sexual abuse there is of women in prison. Well, again, as I was beginning to write this story and not knowing what I was doing and finding characters and all of this, I heard about the Federal Correctional Prison in Dublin, California. and not Dublin, Ireland, Dublin, California. And that prison, I guess they call it the Federal Correctional Institute, it started to get known for the sexual abuse by the guards and eventually by the chaplain and eventually by the warden. And it turned out that 300 women filed complaints against the institution and closed it down, which is unheard of. Now, the stories of how they did this are not so clear, but they did work with outside groups, and many of them faced repercussions, and all sorts of things happened to the women. So I got inspired by that, and I had my Nettie ultimately get involved, change from her correctional officer mentality to understanding that she had killed her abusive husband. She was not that different in many ways than what the women are like that she was living with now. So she got involved and starts a Me Too movement behind bars. And that's the story of Sounds Like Trouble to me.
Yeah, I'm going to have to read that one too.
I hope
I
so.
love the title.
Thank you. And I found that title. Actually, I won't reveal too much about it, but I got a hint from a family member that the title I had gotten originally was lousy, and it needed to be something like Sounds Like Trouble to Me. And so I actually created a story in the book as though the title came from that. In a way, it came from that, and it also came from my relative. So that was funny. But, authors have to find titles that really feel right. And Roger, who is the person who abuses Nettie, says that to Nettie about when he first meets her, that she's not the kind of woman to bring home to his mother. And, it sounds like trouble to me about her.
That's great. I really like some of the things you were saying about writing because I want to dabble in fiction writing. My writing has always been about statistics and crime and how to go about programming, and it's a lot of sociology.
Right.
So but I've always thought about, I'd love to write a fiction story about prison because I spent 20 years in and out of the prisons working as an advocate. And I've done reentry work and I've done all sorts of other prison work. So I have hundreds of stories, and I've always thought, well, I can't do a true story about some of them because it would be not very nice. But
Well, that's
I could
exactly.
write fiction.
You're exactly right. That is exactly the motivation. The way to do it, Valerie, honestly, is just to start. Don't worry about how good it is. Don't worry about, okay, you can even write it with the true names and change them later. Nobody's going to see what you write. But you have to begin.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I definitely want to do a fiction book, and I'm trying to also write a true story about some family history that's been kept a secret for many, many years, and I would really like to get more of that story out there. So I've been doing research on that too. But I like the idea that, like you said, you start somewhere, and if you have a character, or an idea for a story, you got excited about your own idea, which I loved. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that's a great way to write. You have this idea. What happens next?
Yeah.
And like you said, where'd she get the gun?
Right. And I think following those thoughts, and you know that you don't have to tell everything right away, but starting with a story is a good idea because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's why my theater training helped me, because I see scenes, the arc of a scene, beginning, middle, and end. And I think story helped me a lot. Don't write a novel for your first thing, by the way. It's the hardest thing I ever did in my life because you have to layer it. You have to figure out how this story intersects with that story and all of that. And it's hard. It's not easy to do. And, one character might know something that the reader doesn't know, which was very interesting to me. I have a character who knows something that the reader doesn't know until much later in the book. And she reacts to my main character, Nettie, in ways that might seem unclear to the reader, or you might think she's really, quote, bitchy, but you start to understand what's going on later. And those things, you don't find those things. But if you write a story, you'll begin to understand how to put it together if you just let yourself write it and not worry about it being good or bad or anything. I didn't. You just tell the story you want to tell. Pick something that really you don't know too much about and you're fascinated and write to find, like, Joan Didion says, to find out what you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I like that. And that's really good advice for anyone who's listening who says, well, I can't write or I don't write. We all have a story to tell, every single one of us, and only we can tell our own story, whether it's true or fiction.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And for those who are afraid of writing the truth, I think fiction is a really good way of putting those thoughts and feelings down on paper and make it a fiction story rather than it being your story.
I agree.
So, Jean, what are you doing nowadays in your free time?
Well, I haven't started another book exactly, but I'm writing short pieces that I think will end up being a book eventually. Like I wrote, if I give you an example, I did write a piece about fact and fiction. I wrote a piece that was in the Boston Globe about, when I don't have children, and I wrote a piece about how you don't have to have children to be nurturing. And I wrote a piece about that when J.D. Vance came out with that thing about um, cat women or whatever he said. Remember that? Do you
Yes.
remember
Do you
that? Yeah.
know who Amy Blackstone is?
No.
So Amy Blackstone is a sociologist, and her husband have written several things. She teaches on it also, of being childless by choice and all the things that people have said to her and him about, all the negative things about not having children. And she says she loves children, has nieces and nephews she loves spending time with, but she says she likes her time more. And
I
I
do.
totally understand that.
And I couldn't have worked in a prison. I'm not saying that somebody can't, but I couldn't have worked in a prison and had children. I just couldn't have done it. I mean, my priority was having work, and that's always been my priority. And I love my nieces and nephews, and I love their children. My one of my nieces just had a baby, and I really hadn't liked babies until her baby. And now all of a sudden, I always liked 2-year-olds, but babies were harder for me. And now I start to see the incredible joy of that. Yeah, I think motherhood, and that was interesting to me. Back to mother love. Many people were shocked that I could write a book called Mother Love and not be a mother. And that was, I think writers write all the time. Men write women characters, women write
Exactly.
men characters. Why do we have to? That's part of what the imagination is.
Well, and I think anyone who's read the book would never know that you wasn't a mother because of the way the book is written.
Thank you.
But see, working with women in the prisons and having the experiences and hearing their stories, that gave you a lot of insight,
Yeah,
on that.
absolutely.
So,
And I still work with women in different ways. With the Changing Lives program, I'd actually worked with women. The current one I'm doing is with men. A lot of people don't, I hate to say it this way, but it's true. They don't take women seriously. And the work that comes out of a women's prison is often not taken as seriously as the work that comes out of a men's prison. And I think that's a problem. I think we have to nurture that work. I mean, there's a lot of artists, creative people behind bars. Even when I was writing Sounds Like Trouble to Me, I didn't have any art projects that went on there per se, but I referenced some of that. And I think that women just get short shrift in that, in many cases, but also in prison.
I find it really interesting that you brought up the thing about the art because I have multiple pieces of art from several different men. I've never received any women, art from women. And I'm wondering if that's their own, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but that feeling that it's not as good as, or if maybe they just want to hold on to it for themselves and their families, because I can't imagine just giving my art away. if I was an
I think
artist.
younger women probably have more confidence. I think it's a generational thing to some degree, although I do have 2 pieces of art from women in prison, and I bought them from them. And one of the women who used to come to my class, Dolly, she's called in my book, used to knit in class, and those were days when she could bring her knitting needles, which of course you'd never do now, but she could knit in class, and she knit fantastic little things for her family, beautiful pieces of artwork. There's a wonderful book, and I cannot remember the name of it, a great book of art. Darn it, I can't remember the name, but you probably have seen it. And I think that book has much more art by men than art by women. Of course, to be fair, there are many, many, the number of women behind bars is just a fraction of the number of men.
Exactly.
Yeah,
But still too many.
still too many.
Exactly. Is there anything we haven't discussed that we should talk about before we wrap things
Boy,
up today?
let me think.
You have a website?
I should tell you a few of those little advertising things.
Yes, definitely. That's what I want.
Yes, I do have a website, www.jeantrounstine.com. I am on Blue Sky, at jeantrounstine.com. I left Twitter for Blue Sky, and I'm not on Facebook, but my email is jean@trounstine.com, and so you can always reach me. I would be really excited if your listeners pre-ordered my new book, Sounds Like Trouble to Me. It's from a small publisher, Running Wild Press, which is fabulous, and they actually are doing an audio version, which is in addition to a Kindle and a paperback version
Oh,
coming out, which is exciting. A little hard for me, author, to listen to somebody reading my words, but I'm trying. But it's coming out May 12th. What people don't know is that small publishers print more books by the number of pre-orders. So it's really helpful for an author, if you think you might want to read the book, to go ahead and order it ahead of time because it helps get more things printed. I'm excited to say that I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm a lot older than most people can imagine. And I'm excited to say I have no intention of not writing another book. I definitely will write another book.
that's great. And you'll have to get in touch with me and let me know what that one is.
Sure.
Well, I guess we're going to wrap things up. I want to let people know that we've been talking with Jean Trounstine today, and we'll be back in another week with another edition of the Prison Pod.
Thank you, Valerie.
The Pitzer Family Education Foundation, PFEF, is asking incarcerated individuals to become part of a life-changing mission by donating once a month, just the cost of a candy bar, to help send a child of an incarcerated parent to college or trade school. According to the report, PFEF has partnered with 14 state departments of corrections, and those partnerships allow offenders to donate to the foundation. The report also states that 2 of those state systems have placed PFEF information on offender commissary lists and tablet systems so inmates can donate and access scholarship information for their children at any time without pressure. The procedure is simple. Incarcerated individuals who are housed in correctional systems can make donations to PFEF through the methods approved by their facility or Department of Corrections. In some institutions, this may be done through the commissary list or tablet system, where PFEF donation information has been made available.
You have been listening to the Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473.